Welcome to the Dr. Chris Podcast, a space where I delve into all things movement, fitness, and wellness related. Today's guests are Adam Knowles and Bryce Fritzel, the creators of the YouTube channel Ballistic High Speed. Adam was injured in a catastrophic explosion that occurred while they were filming content for their channel. Fortunately, Adam survived with relatively few severe injuries. After a short period of time in the hospital, Adam was discharged and is already well on the road to recovery. In our discussion today, we will discuss exactly what happened to Adam and what caused the accident to occur. We will discuss how both Adam and Bryce responded to the accident to see what we can learn about responding to ballistic trauma events. We will cover the specifics of Adam's injuries and how they were treated. We will also discuss safety procedures for firearms and ballistics and how accidents like this might be avoided in the future. If you're into firearms or ballistics, then this is definitely a conversation that you won't want to miss. So, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I have two guests that I'm very excited to talk about, although I wish the circumstances were different when we were talking, but I'm still excited to talk to these guys. We have done a little bit of work together, or at least I've taken some of their footage to create long-form content in the past, but now we're going to talk about a little bit about what they do and something that has happened recently with them. So I want to welcome both Adam and Bryce from Ballistic High Speed, another YouTube channel. So thank you guys very much for being a part of today's program and for taking time to talk with me. Anytime anybody wants to talk to me, I'm amazed. So thanks.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, absolutely.
No problem. All right. So first things first, Adam, many of my questions are going to be to you, not to leave Bryce out, but obviously for obvious reasons, yes, many of them are going to be towards you. So first of all, Adam, tell me, how are you doing and how is your rehab / recovery going?
I'm doing very well. I mean, especially all things considered, and the recovery is going pretty good. I was able to get 4 out of 5 days back in the gym today, or this week rather. So just sticking to all machine assisted, just kind of seeing what hurts, where are my limits at, and getting things kind of stretched out and easing back into it.
Okay. And for the people who are wondering why I'm asking you how you're doing, in 1 or 2 sentences, can you tell them why am I asking you that and what happened?
So Bryce and I were putting together an episode on rocket propelled grenade launchers. Sometimes they're referred to as recoilless rifles. And one of the booster charges had a catastrophic failure. And instead of, I think it's anywhere from like 6 to 10 sequential charges building up pressure to move a rocket, after the first charge, the remainder of them all went off at once, and it was too much pressure for the pipe to contain, and it essentially turned into a pipe bomb on my shoulder. I don't know if maybe I shouldn't say the B word, but it exploded on my shoulder.
Listen, you can say whatever you want, man. And I have gone over the footage that you sent me several times and in slow motion, and a large part for the people who don't know of what you guys do is all high speed motion, slow motion film and slowing things down. And every time I look at that, I am literally astounded. It is like it's incredible. We're going to get into it more as we go on, but yeah, one of the main comments in the long form content that I've created about that is like it is a minor miracle what happened to you, man. So yeah. Is this your first serious injury? And if so, or even if not, what are your general thoughts about what has transpired with respect to this injury so far?
It's definitely my most serious, but it's definitely not my only serious injury. Prior to this, I've been airlifted once, bled out in the helicopter, 300 stitches, broken jaw, had 8 to 12 staples, shattered my clavicle and had a plate and 12 screws. I don't even know how many concussions. I think that's about it.
My goodness, man, that's a lot of damage that you have done to yourself over the years. In the video where you and Bryce both went over what happened, one of the things you talked about was some of the amnesia that you had, and I talk about that in my content. How much do you recall of the actual incident itself? So, what was the last thing prior to that you can clearly remember? And then what's the first thing afterwards that you can clearly remember?
The last thing that I can remember prior to is saying one. I went 3, 2, 1, and then I woke up at some point to assess my injuries and help during the first aid process, and then out again to the trauma bay. So Bryce had kind of broken it down. I think it was like 3.5 minutes from initial explosion until the first thing that I can recall.
And actually, so this is something that I commented on and I think is important. Both there is both retrograde amnesia, so amnesia from that preceded the actual incident, and anterograde amnesia, the amnesia that follows the incident. They're relatively correlated with one another, but both of which are correlated to the severity of the head injury that you've received. And one of the things that was very encouraging to me was that relatively speaking, like you go, oh shit, man, 3.5 minutes, like I lost that. In the grand scheme of things, 3.5 minutes is not very much.
Really?
And so like I was very pleasantly to me it was very encouraging when I was watching the footage to know, oh, okay, like he's actually starting to remember things, and he can remember relatively close to the time of the injury. So that even though I knew instantaneously you had a head injury, a traumatic brain injury, that was a good thing, because I was like, oh, okay, well, the amnesia is not that long, so that's good.
That's kind of crazy because when I was first kind of telling people, I was like, yeah, I remember pulling the trigger. And then it was like 10, 15 seconds until, I was kind of coming back and getting into first aid. And then Bryce showed me the video and showed me the timestamps, and it was like 3.5 minutes. I was like, oh, that is not what I remember at all.
Well, so the other thing, and Bryce, please tell us what your perspective is. So there is, and actually you will know this from your experience in the military, is compression of time, right? Like a lot of times, oftentimes, well, it can actually go both ways. So you can have compression of time, but when you are the person in it, sometimes time will slow down, right? And so seconds will go by, but to you it seems like, oh my God, that was like hours of time, right? So Bryce, what was your perspective in terms of how quickly things were transpiring and what occurred?
Well, I want to say in the moment, it was sort of like I became the high-speed camera, where everything seemed like it was in slow motion. But then thinking back on it, it's like time contracted the opposite way. So like my memory is very condensed, but in the moment it felt like it was forever. So that's interesting to compare. I want to say that when I think back on it, it's a lot of individual slices of important like things that were said, or timestamps of like this happened, or medics arrived, or he finally is responding. It's like slices in my brain of remembering things, and not much in between. Like all the fluff of the running around and the waiting for this or that all kind of disappears. And this is kind of just a curiosity thing for me. But when you're talking about like retrograde amnesia, some of that can be caused physically, right? Like an actual impact to the head. But then there's also like the mental side of it, of your brain sort of I don't know if it's a protection method or what it is, but it can be split between those kinds of things, right? So that's why, you know, right after happening, you might have a certain amount of memory, and then later on, some of it disappears, but other parts get filled in. Those are those two different types of amnesia. Okay.
Yeah, no, for sure. That is exactly that. Part of it, depending on how traumatic your brain perceives it to be, it may say, "Oh, like you don't want to know this," and
Right.
it just kind of puts it in a closet and throws away the key,
Yeah.
right?
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. But
So,
I want to say that for me, most of that memory is still there. It's definitely been categorized by my brain as 90% of that, 80% of that was just, you know, fluff. And here's a lot of the key moments. But it's totally different from when it's happening. And it feels like every second is minutes and it's taking forever for things to happen. It's a striking difference.
mhm. What was the actual, so from the time of the injury to the time where Adam is on the backboard being taken away, how much was that time?
Um, it was probably a good 30, 40 minutes, I want to say. Um, because of the location we were in, it took a bit for first responders to get there, just because it's kind of off the beaten track, over some hills, things like that. And then when we got there, it was a lot of onset care as far as, you know, the burns, assessing him for more stuff. And then they had to find a special landing area for the helicopter, and that was not easy to find. So it took a bit, but at least in terms of medics getting there, I want to say they got there pretty quick. It just takes a while for the helicopter to land safely and all of that. But I'd say within 30, 40 minutes.
Mhm. And were you guys with so part in the video, you know, somebody says call 911. Were you guys in cell phone range, or were you
Yeah.
using? Okay, yeah. So that just what, you know, when you speaking about being off the beaten path, that also makes me think, oh shit, you know, like if I think about where I live sort of on the outskirts of town. I'm still in a subdivision, but it's in an area where cell coverage is not that great.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
about, oh shit, you know, which is something I wouldn't even really have considered. And I think, oh man, imagine had that been somewhere where there was no cell coverage, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. It was just that part of the state that, you know, 5 minutes down one road, suddenly you've got, you know, really hilly terrain and, you know, stuff like that. So as far as off the beaten path, the terrain was rough, but, you know, we were within 5, 10 minutes of, you know, gas stations and other roads. So,
Mhm. So Adam, what were you thinking, or what were you concerned about so from the moment that you could first think clearly after this, what was kind of going through your head? And then did those thoughts or concerns change after you arrived at the hospital? And here I'm assuming that you actually can sort of start to really think about things before you arrive, but maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah, when I first kind of came to, it was mainly I looked at my arms and they were there.
Hmm.
Because you kind of go through, you know, the old march, the, you know, massive hemorrhaging, airway, respiratory, circulation, and hypothermia. So I wasn't missing limbs or digits. I immediately noticed the burns because you quite literally couldn't miss them. And then in listening to what people were saying, they were saying he's bleeding. They had kind of identified from where. Nobody was talking about, you know, spurting or massive blood loss or anything. So I kind of assumed it was, you know, minimal at worst.
Hmm.
And so then when the aid bag got there, I just kind of got into the burn unit because most people understand what to do with bleeding. They take a shirt off and just stick it to it if you have to.
Hmm.
What most people don't know about is like burns. And so the thing that I was apparently most concerned with was telling everybody where the burn mod was, getting the burn gel in the burn wraps and those things out, And then at that point, Bryce had kind of figured out what was going on and he was doing a bunch of it. And then at that point, my brain just turned back off again.
Bryce, so what were your thoughts, as this incident transpired in front of you? And same question, as things progress over that 30 minutes, did your thoughts change?
Yeah, it was a pretty wild roller coaster from the instant of detonation to when he was getting loaded up on into the helicopter. When it first happened, I don't know if how much I've described it this way, but I didn't see the actual detonation with my eyes. I just saw the immediate after effects of it, because I was laying flat on the ground, arm over my head, just in case, because we were testing the backblast on that dummy head, and we just assumed worst case scenario, it just disintegrates it, and we've got little pieces of bone or whatever, flying around just to be extra safe. And so my job was to just trigger the high speed, and then when I look up from it, Adam's body is completely covered in smoke, so I don't know where he is, and pieces of his body armor and his helmet are flying off, landing in front of me. So the first thing that I saw was just his helmet and smoke. So that's sort of like the first like confusion part of shock, where it's just like, I don't know what happened. Did he disappear, blow up, or is he just covered by smoke? So that was the first like surge of adrenaline. And then when I get up to see him, I see he's obviously all still there, which is excellent. But even in that moment, once the adrenaline is really kicking in, it's hard to parse individual thoughts and think things through. So I can still see that he's kind of messed up. The blood is starting to come down his face. The way his body kind of seized up on the ground, you couldn't really tell what was wrong yet. It almost looked like his hand got blown off because of the way that his arm was bent. All of his arm was, well, most of it was black, basically. And then his face, something was definitely wrong with his face. He couldn't breathe or talk. He was more of like the grunting of just like, what your body does when it's going through that kind of trauma. So it started really high of, did he just disappear? And then it kind of settled down to, he's here, he's breathing, he's conscious, but I don't know how bad the injuries are. And you can kind of see it in that footage in our video, but like I was starting to freeze up as I'm looking at him, because I'm seeing more and more things wrong, including the bottom half of his face being misaligned, which is really shocking to see on a person when you see it for the first time. And all of the burns and all of the blood and all of that. And the way that he was grunting, I didn't know if he was like, had a lung had collapsed, and I just have like almost no medical knowledge. So it's a lot of my brain trying to figure out new information while it's struggling to just be normal anyways. And then once we got some people up there and, I was calling 911, then it kind of settled back down because he was up, he was starting to talk. I could see the blood was pretty localized and not, that serious. His burns were manageable. It's not like, like pieces of his arms were missing. All of his hand was there. So then it kind of keeps stabilizing as it goes on. And then once you start to get the whole grasp of everything, then it kind of picks back up, because now you got to think about like, Adam's in for a long ride recovery wise. Is this going to get worse if first responders don't get here in time? Is he going to go into some sort of weird shock or heart attack because his body can't handle what's happening to him? There's just a lot of stuff that was all new to me that I was trying to parse through and figure out, and it was really hard. And then finally first responders get there, and of course they're trained to be calm, to keep you calm, and then they just kind of figure it out, and then he's off to the hospital. So it's a weird roller coaster, and definitely not how I expected something like that to go.
One thing that you mentioned there, which I think is interesting, you talked about freezing, so I'm a military physician. I'm a reservist, and I teach I teach the orthopedic portion of a trauma course for med techs, nurses, and military officers, enlisted officers. And one of the things that we talk about, Adam mentioned March, and we, I'm talking a little bit higher up, ATLS, but it's all basically the same thing: ATLS, TCCC, and whatnot. And we talk a lot about patterns and repetition. And one of the things that drives me nuts about the military is how much we go over repetition and patterns and things. But I understand the reason why we do it. And one of those reasons is exactly what you mentioned there, is this idea of freezing. Like when shit hits the fan, and oh my God, you are overwhelmed by what has happened in front of you. Your brain reverts back from the higher higher mental capacity frontal portion of the brain back to the reptilian lizard brain, and then it's fight, flight, survival. And so you don't want to, you want to be thinking as little as possible during those times, right? And you want to, you end up falling back to what's rote, what's repetition, what's, what you've practiced. And for somebody like yourself who's not seen that thing, it's like, oh my God, like what do I have? Like what's happened? What do I do? And I think about, when I roll into a trauma in the emergency department, there could be bones sticking out, there's blood, and people who have no experience, they freak out. And for me, it's like, it's not to say that that stuff doesn't mean anything. It does, but it's like I just go into robot mode. It's like, okay, boom, this is the up. What do I do here? What do I hear? Go through my ATLS protocol, bang, and knock things off. And that's the reason why, because you can, when you talk about recovery from trauma, you talk about the golden hour, like that first hour. That's where we can, like, if he wasn't blown up, where we're gonna make the most impact is that first hour. So what are all the things that we can get done in that first hour, right? And it comes back to not memorization, but rote practice. What is ingrained, right? So I think that's a real thing. And you basically described it. It's like, oh, okay, like what's going on? What do I have to do? So yeah. Adam, at this moment, so when it first happened, we talked to people about endorphins and the body's natural response to trauma. So if you can remember back, so what was your pain level at that moment, while you're laying there waiting for the first responders? And basically, were the endorphins doing their job? And when is the first time that you noticed significant pain? And just for clarification, so for people who are watching, we're going to use a pain scale, 0 to 10. 0 is no pain at all. 10 is the worst pain imaginable. So, at the time when you first noticed things, what was your pain scale? And yeah, did that change over time?
Yeah, I was actually really hoping I would get to clarify this with somebody at your expertise level, because it was explained to me by a neurosurgeon later down the road, a week or so, while I was in Vanderbilt. But I experienced almost no pain when I first woke up, and then when I first got to the trauma bay, they had to run me through a CT scan because I can't go through MRIs anymore for life now, because they didn't know how much fragmentation was throughout my body. So they can't stick me in an MRI, so they put me in a CT scan, and they had me just kind of like sleeping at attention, and they ran me through that way. And then they asked, they're like, can you get your arms above your head? They're like, if you can't, it's fine, we have a scan, but if you can, the more scans we get, the better. And I was like, yeah, I probably can. And lifted my arms up, and that was the second time I realized, like, oh man, that's not good. But I got him up over my head, got through the scan again, and then got moved back to the trauma bay. And that was when things kind of started to set in. When the literal smoke had cleared, I was done being like massively tended to. Now I was down to like a charge nurse and then just a nurse in the room. Bryce and my wife were there in the room as well. And that was when the pain started to come through, and it started to come through quick because I couldn't have any pain meds yet because they found a brain hemorrhage, and I guess you can't get pain medications while you have a brain bleed. But they had to clean the wounds, and so it was a nurse on each arm basically just holding them down and taking what I would describe as steel wool. I'm sure you know what it actually is. And they just went to town, just scraping, zero pain medication whatsoever. And that gives me a new threshold to what that number 10 actually means. That is by far the worst pain I have ever been in my life. And I hope that remains my number 10 because that was freaking off. Bryce was there for it. That was, I mean, that was like some FBI enhanced interrogation techniques there. That was, that sucked.
Well, so two things I want to comment on there. So number one, that truly shows you the powerful effect of endorphins, right? Like, so endogenous opioids that your brain produces to address pain. The fact that you can make it that far, half an hour plus whatever they did for transport, plus all of that stuff that they're doing in the initial assessment, up to imaging, and not really be in pain too much. That shows you the extent of those. Because if we had to manage that with morphine or Dilaudid or fentanyl, like, you know what I mean? Like, it would have been very difficult to do that, right? And so the fact that you were able to make it that far off endogenous opioids is, I think that just shows you how powerful the chemicals are that your brain can create. The second point that I want to say is that so whenever I talk to patients about pain, that's one of the questions I have to ask them. And pain is a very subjective thing. And when the pain scale that I use in my office, if people just hear it, they think, what the hell is this guy asking? Like, why is it so ridiculous? So when I say to people, I say, I want to know what your pain is. Because sometimes people will say, oh, my pain was 12 out of 15, 12 out of 10. I said, bro, you don't understand the pain scale. Let me refocus that for you. And so I always tell them this. I said, so on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 is no pain, 10 is the worst pain imaginable. Where for 10, what I'm talking about is that you would give me $1,000 out of your pocket right now to cut off that extremity with a rusty, dull butter knife. That's a 10. And it sounds like ridiculous, right? But when you imagine that, you go, holy shit, like that would be really painful. And it's like, holy shit, taking steel wool or steel brush to scrub the dirt and the metal fragments out of my arm with no pain medication, that's painful. You and I can both agree that's a 10. Wow, that's painful, right? So, just as you said, I love what you said. It allows me to reevaluate what my 10 is and to put my pain scale in perspective. Because you and I can both agree that is fucking painful, right? Like, and that puts everything else into perspective, right?
So it was once they were kind of going at it, I don't know, it was like borderline like convulsing in pain. I was just like shaking. And one of the nurses, he was like, hey man, he's like, it helps if you talk. He's like, just kind of talk through it. And I was like, did anybody ever punch you in the face while you're doing this? He was like, let's not make you be the first.
All right. I like it, man. But no doubt. I can just imagine how much how uncomfortable that is. I remember during a residency, we had a lady when I was doing my surgical rotation. And this was a lady that had a C-section, and then the wound had become infected. And she was an obese lady. And then she ended up getting like necrotizing fasciitis. So we had to debride that, so clean that all out. And then we couldn't close the wound because the wound was infected. So this lady so imagine this big lady who's about almost 300 pounds with an entire abdomen that's open and packed with wet dressings that we need to change twice a day. And like her belly is open, right? And we have to take those dressings out and then stuff in new dress. Like, bro, man, like that. Like when people talk about pain, that you know, if they only knew that the kinds of things that we do to humans, then they would really get to sort of refocus what their expectation or their beliefs are. Because like that, every time I did it, I felt so bad. And we were giving her sedation, we were giving her analgesics, but it still wasn't touching like, you know, the amount of pain that she was having. It's just yeah.
There was also an kind of another thing that with Bryce being in the room, so I'm like just listening to the nurses, and they're telling me like, hey, if it gets too painful, you know, we can take a break. We don't have to do this all at once. And I'm just kind of sitting there just writing it out. And Bryce was like, Adam, it's okay. Like you can take a break. So, like he could see that it was like going out of control. And for some reason, there was a difference in hearing it from Bryce. It was like, oh, okay. Where when the nurse says it, it's like, oh, I'm fine. I'm good. I can take it. And then Bryce is like, dude, it's cool. Like, calm down. And I was like, okay, all right. You're right. You're right.
You can sort of, people that you know really well, you can sort of tell when they're at their limit, and like because you've never seen it before, and you're like, that's new for them. You know, if I can step in to help them, you know, even just by saying something, I probably should.
Well, so what were you thinking like at that moment?
I I don't know. I I think I was more surprised by what all goes on quickly in a hospital when you arrive in that state. Um, and I mean, I don't want to say rushed definitely isn't the right word, but like they're getting through steps quickly. So when they get to a painful part like that, it's sort of it's happening now, ready, set, go. There's not like, you know, in an hour we're going to prepare for this thing where we're going to, you know, proceed to start cleaning the wounds, and you know, it's just like we're here, we're going. So like even just to somebody watching it, a bystander, it's a little bit alarming, and I'm sure it was for his wife as well. But so I can only imagine being the person going through it, of just like you have no time to prepare for anything. It's just you're getting your care, and that's it. We're moving on to the next step.
Mm-hmm. So Adam, did you when you're laying there on the ground, okay, did you initially understand the extent of your injuries, or when's the first moment that you actually knew what was going on? Was it when you were at the hospital, or like when in that whole timeline?
Yeah, I would say probably when they had me raise my arms to go through the CT scan, because then I'd kind of like woken up a little bit, kind of calmed down. There weren't other people like saying different things that were going on, and I could just kind of, when I lifted my arms up, I could just me in a quiet room saw them, and I was like, okay. And the fact that they weren't doing anything else meant that that was pretty much where it was. Like I could tell I didn't have tourniquets on my legs, so like I didn't take anything like through the femoral or like something crazy like that. So I could kind of just tell it was isolated to what was going on right here. And it was like this, it was technically the second time I'd seen him, but I would say it was the first time I really got to look at him. And then again in the trauma bay, that is where it almost kind of started to get scary, because up until this point it was just, I'm injured, it hurts, but it's not that bad. And then once they went through and oh, you said it, what, debridled?
Debridement.
Debridement. So once they had done that and then they left me, the other thing I wasn't prepared for was my body is no longer able to internally control its own temperature.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like convulsingly cold, but I can't do anything about it. And then next thing I know, I'm so hot that I'm puking, but my jaw was broken. And so that's forcing me to like rip my jaw open to vomit. And then that sends me through a whole nother thing of pain. And then it's right back to shivering cold. And there was nothing anybody could do about it. They couldn't give me anything. I've got this, still got the C collar on, and the C collar, one of like the high points of it was digging right into where I'd taken the laceration, and my cheekbone was broken in two places. So every time I have to, like, I'm shivering, it's just like slamming against my broken cheekbone. And it was just, I've said it a few times, it was a revolving door of suck. It just, there was no easing it, there was no comfort, there was no anything.
I might be remembering this wrong, but was the only reason you had the C collar on was just because they thought maybe you had a neck injury, but you didn't? Or was there like a real reason you had to keep that on?
They hadn't got the scans back to prove whether or not I had, because it was such a massive trauma to the neck. They didn't know if I'd maybe fractured it or something is what they were looking for, I'm assuming. But
yeah, and when so in a trauma situation, like I comment on this in the video that, you know, we're looking at your GCS, right? And another good sign for me is that your GCS, level of consciousness, or Glasgow Coma Scale, was relatively good throughout. Like, you initially lost consciousness, but very quickly you came to. Your GCS was over 8, and you were speaking, so you were protecting your airway. So they are looking at the GCS as a tool that will help them to determine the integrity of your C-spine. But if you've had a traumatic brain injury, are we able to 100% rely on what you tell us? Not necessarily. So in that context, we're going to go to the next step, which is to get imaging. And so the collar stays on, right, until we can get you to 100% comply with our instructions and give us good answers, or we can rule it out with imaging. Collar stays on, which means a whole lot more stuck, you know?
Yep.
I know pretty well in my industry, it's imaging is pretty much the final say on anything. You can't really fake imaging.
No, exactly, exactly. So Bryce, before the first responders arrived, what was your belief of the injuries that Adam had sustained? And were you ever, once you got past the point of, okay, well, Adam is still there, he's largely in one piece.
Right.
Were you ever concerned that his injuries might be lethal or limb threatening?
I don't. That's hard to answer. I think the most shocking thing for me that I wasn't certain about mentally was when I saw his face. Because to me, it looked like under the surface, his head had been almost smashed in, and maybe my memory is sort of exaggerating a bit more just because of how shocking it was. But I didn't like my brain thought like his skull has been crushed in, his jaw is dislocated and snapped, and like it looked very severe to me on his face. And again, that may just be, played up a little bit in my memory, but that's what my thought was until he was able to like respond correctly and talk and assist us with finding stuff in the medical bag. Then it kind of clicked into my head, maybe that's not so bad, at least is what I thought it was, because if we were talking about his skull getting crushed in, I think it would be obvious that something's wrong, because I don't think he'd be responding very well or thinking clearly, or it'd be more readily apparent that something's really wrong. At that point, I don't I to me it was just because I've had pretty severe burns before, pretty localized small areas, but so I know, like, it's, as far as we can tell, it's just burns, and we're gonna get through that. And once could tell that his face wasn't as messed up as I thought it was, I was like, okay, this is all recoverable. It's just gonna be a long, painful ride. So I think that clicked in pretty clearly for me before medics got there. And then once they got there, they kind of affirmed most of what I was thinking. So I think it was just getting over that first big hump of what happened to his head, and then once I got through that, it was all pretty clear. It was going to be okay.
Did you ever notice anything draining from his ears or out of his nose?
No, the most, and this was while I was talking on with 911 dispatchers. I didn't really see this part. I just heard about it. Was because his face laceration was bleeding so much, it was kind of pooling up on his neck, and I think somebody thought that his neck was bleeding, and then it was pretty quickly figured out, like, no, that's coming from his face. Nothing's cut there. But I mean, some of it was because, like, of the way he was laying and turning. Some of it was like up on his ear and on his face, but I think it was pretty apparent the whole time. It was just his cheek, and like nothing coming out of his mouth or his nose or anything that I could tell.
Did Todd ever tell you the story about that? About the blood on my neck?
He'd mentioned it surface level. Is there more to it?
So there's another gentleman's there. He's above my head, and I don't know what he has, but he has it stuck to my neck because the blood had pooled down there. And he asked me later on, he's like, "Do you remember saying this at all?" And I was like, I don't remember talking to you at all. So apparently I'm laying there and he's pushing on it like that. And he said, "You grabbed my hand and you said, 'That's not where the fucking injury is.' And you stuck it to your cheek."
Wow.
And I was like, "Oh." Well, that I was right.
Sometimes
it was the cheek.
Sometimes you have to be very direct.
Yeah. It's all good, man. But yeah, it's in that situation. It's hard. There are potentially a lot of red herrings because there's blood and potentially deformity. So sometimes things look, oh geez, like that looks like that's it. But it can not, you can be fooled because of the blood, or you can often miss things because you look at the thing, oh, there's blood here, so it looks gruesome, and then you miss, three other things that are also important because they just weren't as graphic.
Yeah, it's also hard to know how to make a hierarchy of what's more important to treat first when you have zero experience doing it. Because I mean, I could imagine a situation where if somebody was cut, maybe in a few different places, you could assess, well, this is in a little bit more risky of an area, or this cut is deeper or worse, so let's treat this first and then move down the list. But when it's broken bones and severe burns in multiple places and cuts and bleeding and potentially neck injuries, potentially TBI, it's like, what do you do first, and how much attention do you give it before moving on to the next thing? And it was a good thing we had that many people there, so everybody could kind of focus on a different thing. But I can imagine being by yourself, so I would not know what to start with. I would just, it's like, this looks bad, let's start here.
So this is a perfect segue to my next question. I'm gonna ask the question, but then I have something to add on at the end. So Adam, while you were waiting for the first responders, did your thoughts wander to TCCC and to March principles?
I absolutely did. For the short time I was conscious, it was not in order, I would say, though.
Mm-hmm.
I immediately looked for amputation because I knew that that's where the bad stuff would be. and then focused on the burns. And then from there, I kind of ruled out the others because I was talking, which meant I had a decent airway for now. I did keep in the back of my head to pay attention for like a tension pneumothorax and, see if I start dropping off one of my lungs or something. And then just listening to the way people were talking about the bleeding, I had kind of ruled out that there was no more bleeding and everything had kind of been dwindled down to my arms outside of head and neck injuries. But there's no way me laying on the ground in that position, I'm going to be able to teach somebody how to get the splint out of the kit, make a makeshift C-collar, put it on without cutting off my carotids and making this whole thing a lot worse. So just kind of left that one alone. And then I wasn't around very long. And then Bryce had taken over and then I say I passed back out, but apparently that's not true. I just blacked out. Apparently I was still up and I guess talking and stuff like that.
So, so I think that's quite interesting, and I think so. As a point, I think your ability to do that shows the strength of what I was talking about before. In that we go over these things, rote memorization and repetition so many times, so that in those circumstances you fall back onto your your training, and then it just becomes automatic. So that's the first point. The second point that I want to make is that before I was talking about TCCC and ATLS. So they're basically the same thing, but TCCC is like for like an infantry soldier, and ATLS is higher level for physicians and medical specialists. And ATLS, our principles are ABCDE, which is airway, breathing, circulation, disability, and exposure or extremities. We basically go through the same things that you do, but at a higher level. But because hemorrhage is the number one cause of people dying in that golden hour, we are actually thinking of changing that. The American Surgical Association is thinking of changing our principles a little bit to reflect March more instead of ABCDE, because March puts massive hemorrhage first, because the guys who are on the front lines recognize, man, if you could have whatever injury, but if you are bleeding out, like you only have 5 liters of blood, and if you are bleeding massively, you may not be around for us to fix anything else if we don't stop that, put a tourniquet on that now, or pressure dressing or whatever. So there is some thought to changing that to reflect the massive hemorrhage that might be occurring, right? Not to say that airway is not important, and it is still the number one thing for us, but certainly if you don't address that massive bleeding, then you're going to have problems. So
Yeah, and I would say on top of going through, TCCC, I'd always kind of been medically minded. So, but I got out as a staff sergeant. And so I'd been through the NCO Corps. And when you go through the NCO Corps, when you put on your first set of stripes, people now look to you to make a decision and execute and make something happen. And the biggest thing that they harped on was make a decision. No decision is worse than maybe even, a bad decision.
Exactly.
And so I think I just kind of went back to that, even on the ground. It's like, okay, something needs to happen. Todd, that's not it. It goes here. Here's the bag. Take this, put that on. Like, just do some things. And then other people, they just kind of fall in line. Like, oh, shit, okay, I guess we're just doing this. And then things get done.
Well, these are the situations where, like, you don't have the luxury of not doing anything, right? And I say that to people about, like, when I'm in the OR, like, I have a plan. Okay, I'm going to do this hip replacement. I'm going to do whatever. I'm going to fix this trauma. That's my plan. And I go through the steps of the plan. But if, for example, we cut an artery or something, and which has happened before, right? Like somebody's got a little bit different anatomy, or you just cut a little bit further. You go, oh, I need to loosen this up a little bit more. I'm going to cut here. You cut a little bit further than you should have. Blood is coming up. You do not have the luxury of going, oh, what do I do? You need to do something. And any decision, even if it's a bad decision, is better than doing nothing, right? And so, yeah, you need to, sometimes you just need to start doing shit. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, right? And then you can sort of evaluate as you go, what was the response to that thing that I did? Was it good, bad? Okay, more of that, less of that, move on, you know?
Yep.
So what's the exact list of injuries that you had, Adam?
So I sustained a traumatic brain injury. I had a temporal skull fracture with a brain bleed. Broke my cheekbone in 2 different places. Dislocated jaw. Laceration to the cheek. And then 10 to 15% of my upper extremities were 3rd-degree burns requiring skin grafts.
Woo! Yeah, man.
I think that's all of them.
And
and then
fragmentation throughout.
Oh yeah, fragmentation throughout mostly my right side, and then the nerves to the right half of my face were and kind of still are unresponsive. So like only get about half.
Yes. Well, I mentioned that in my video. I wasn't sure what the cause of it was. Was it, from the laceration or from the explosion? Because there are different types of nerve injuries. So that was something that I spoke about. But so it'll be interesting to see how the nerve recovery goes. How long were you in the hospital for? And how much of that time were you like in intensive care or burn unit?
I was in the burn unit for 14 days straight.
Okay, perfect. And then were you discharged directly home from there?
Yep.
Okay.
I mean, I have follow-ups and all that kind of stuff. But
Sure. Yeah. How many surgeries did you have?
Oh man, I had 3 or 4 while I was in Vanderbilt. And then I don't know if I'm done. I actually just had to go get new CT scans. So the ENT specialist, the ear, nose, throat, kind of dealt with my face. They looked at my scans while I was there, and they said cheekbone's broken in 2 places, but all of the 3 individual segments are held in by other structures. So it should just grow back up on its own. So they asked if I wanted a plate. I said, no, let's just let it grow back naturally. Well, that may not have happened. And so I don't know if this is going to happen or not, but if the scans don't come back good, then from what I've kind of been piecing together, I may have to go in, have it rebroken, and have the plate put on it, and then wire my jaw shut and let it heal that way. Hoping that's not the case.
So when you fractured, so cheekbone, maxilla, did they tell you whether you had a Lefort 1, 2, or 3 fracture?
I don't know. It's probably in my chart somewhere. They just kind of layman's termed it that it was broken.
Okay. Well, so basically, a Lefort 1 is where you take a piece of your cheek. Lefort 2 is basically you could take your cheek and your nose as one piece, and a Lefort 3 is you basically could take your face off. So I'm assuming it was a Lefort 1 if it's on the one side, but there's a possibility that it could have been a Lefort 2 where the fracture line goes up through your nose. So but that's me just geeking out as a surgeon.
Just from the way that they
the like treatment
explained it and where they like poked at, I mean, it was pretty isolated to just right here. So
okay. And when they like, so how did they reduce your jaw? Especially since you're, well, I guess the jaw is a separate bone. So did they do that right in the trauma bay?
They must have. I don't remember them like really talking about my jaw at all. The first I heard it was from Bryce when he was describing that my jaw was. So I don't know if they just kind of did that while I was in the. Yeah, I don't know. Works pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Listen, I know from my own experience. I just had I had a TMJ dislocation uh, that was treated with a brace for about 6 months, and it finally went back into location because it didn't fully dislocate; it was subluxing. So I know that that was a bit of a pain in the ass, and for a long time I could not open my mouth. Like I could barely get a finger in.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that was
The
not very fun.
one of my previous injuries. I was little, but I was riding a bike and I flipped over the handlebars, and the first thing that hit the ground was my chin, and my jaw had separated in the rear and kind of been shoved like just up. It like rotated my mouth down and shoved everything up. And
Mm.
so I was like deaf because everything was like pinching my like ear canals closed, and
Yeah.
I couldn't talk because I was just crammed open. And I remember them getting me to the hospital, and I remember just seeing like that really bright light, and then a guy just put a glove on, and I couldn't see his hand because my jaw was down here, and he just grabbed and pulled, and I just heard everything cracking, and then all the audio came back, and then I just projectile vomited all over everything. And then I woke up to seeing the needle come through as he's putting the sutures in, and then I woke up and jaw was wired shut and all that stuff. Had to, I mean, it was nothing but blended up cheeseburgers for 6 weeks, and yeah,
Yeah.
so hoping to not have to do that again.
Yeah, hopefully not. Um, so are you still getting wound care for your burns?
I actually just got deemed healed last week.
Okay,
I
cool.
still do. They gave me like a special lotion and stuff that's kind of supposed to help with scarring.
Yep.
But outside of that, we're down to just figuring out what's going on with the cheek. And then I got to go in and do my hearing test, vision test, and then a memory function test.
Okay. Where did they get your grafts from? From your thighs?
Yep. They took one big one off my right thigh.
Okay. And there was actually enough to go like I'm sure they fenestrated the graft, so the
Yep.
graft is got lots of little holes in it. Yeah. So that helps it to spread out. But I was really concerned when I watched the video with you both going over the slow-mo film, and I saw the extent of your dressings. I was thinking to myself, like, are they going to have enough on his thighs to cover that shit?
Yeah, it went from, I mean, it's pretty much, I don't know, like, what do I call that? Probably like 10 to 12 inches long and 3.5, 4 inches wide, just one big strip.
Okay.
And then some on the wrist, goes up the forearm a little bit, a couple spots on the chest, and then another spot on the left arm.
Okay. One thing that I thought, and I made a comment in my discussion of your footage. One thing which I thought was very, very encouraging, especially given the extent of your burns, I was paying very much close attention to your hands while you were showing the recoilless rifle on the table, and I was watching your hands and watching the movement of your fingers because you seem to have very good dexterity still of your fingers. So I thought,
Oh, yeah.
okay, he's got good burns, but there you don't have any significant contractions, meaning that the underlying tissue is pretty good. So you know you might look like you had burns, but your function is preserved.
Yeah, there was one spot more up, kind of over my bicep. Um, we pretty much assume it was like ground zero from all of the propulsion jetting out when that metal plate blew out of the launcher,
Mhm.
and they had to excise quite a bit out of that one. Pretty much, if you take a hockey puck, cut it in half, you could have sat it down inside of it, and like you had to do with that lady, it had to stay open for a few days, and so I had to have all that stuff taken out and re-wet packed and all that stuff. When you were saying it, I was sitting here like, ooh, oh, I remember that.
You know exactly what I'm talking about.
I remember that because there was one time one of the nurses came in and she was doing something with it, and when she turned, her shears caught it and it just ripped it out. Oh, that hurts so bad. But yeah, then they closed it up. But they said that in cutting it out, it had stopped like right before any muscle, any nerves, pretty lucky.
I think one distinction about the type of explosion that sort of not helped, but made this not so severe was that it was, because there's a big difference between a subsonic deflagration explosion versus a supersonic actual explosion. And that's sort of the difference between working with, say, black powder versus C4 or something. Whereas if this was what is normally in the warhead, which is high explosives, detonated, that would have pushed burns much deeper into the tissue. Shrapnel would have been much deeper. And because this was black powder, not only is the explosion a lot slower, but you also have, it's still trying to burn through the unburnt powder as it's escaping. So he's got a lot of spots of what I'm pretty sure was unburnt powder that had just embedded in the skin. So it wasn't peak explosion when it was contacting the skin. It was still spreading out, still reaching stoichiometry, and it was, black powder subsonic instead of an actual raw explosion. So I think if it had been, that other category of explosion, he probably would have had some tissue damage. His dexterity would have been kind of messed up. So I think in that regard, it kind of assisted in it not being so bad.
So Bryce, tell me, have you ever been in a situation that involved a similar level of injury or trauma? And part two, how exactly, if so, how did you feel during that situation?
Definitely never to that extent. I've dealt with little cuts, little burns. I've been in my fair share of a couple car accidents and just making sure everyone's okay, but never to this level. This was 90% of what happened that day was brand new to me. So, yeah, even the 911 call of that severity was new to me. All of it was new. So I don't really have an interesting way to answer that.
Well, no, every experience is a learning experience. So I think that it's worthwhile to, not that you want to experience it, but that you have had a good outcome. Because I think that better prepares you for things that you might see in the future.
Yeah. Every other circumstance was so manageable that I had never experienced shock and fear and, pure adrenaline rush like I had that time. So that was my first time trying to mentally fight off shock so that I could pay attention. That's the first time I'd ever experienced that. So if that puts any context to how tame everything else has been in my life.
Yeah, but you know what? Just the same way we talked earlier about how the experience, the pain that Adam felt when he was first starting to, come to, or the pain that he experienced when they were scrubbing. This, like that, allowed him to reframe his perspective of pain, and this likewise allows you to sort of reframe your perspective of like, what's intense, what is traumatic. Like it just gives you a new point on that scale.
Yeah, I think before that experience, it was always so easy to watch videos of, like an accident video online you see, and then people just standing around. It's like, why are you just standing there? Do
Yeah.
something. And now I have a taste of like, well, sometimes you can't for a second.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
even jumping on a 911 call, it took me a while to parse words and sentences together to clearly convey information. Like to just think of like, okay, what is the address? Even though it was right there on my phone, you just have to like think things through, and it's like the information's right there. Your brain is so focused on that, you're just like, all right, easy stuff, and
Mhm.
it's so different.
So it's interesting that you say that, because it makes me think. So one of the things that they teach in the basic first aid course, or CPR course, right? So the first thing that you do is to make sure that the area is safe for yourself. The second thing that you do is if somebody else is there, you direct that person, not ask, you direct that person to call 911, give them the information, and then come back to you to report. And the reason is for that, what you just mentioned is that people are like, oh my God, like what was like, and so if you are a first responder, you've been trained and you direct somebody so that you give them clear instructions because they're like, oh my God, they're like not knowing what to do. Give them clear instructions. And then you make sure they come back to you so you can say, yo, Bryce, did you call 911? And did you tell them,
Yeah.
So that's a very important thing that is a part of basic first aid, and it seems dumb when people are telling you to do that, but it's for that reason, right? Like if you've never been exposed to that type of thing, it's like you're overwhelmed, and it's like, oh, what do I do? And like, oh my God.
Yeah, I think that idea of directing was like already kind of in my mind, and I didn't really realize this till I watched the footage back, but despite the fact that I was already dialing 911 and getting ready to call them, I was still telling and asking people to call 911. I was still in that mode of like as many people that can help as possible, even though I was already doing the thing I was asking for. So I'm sure that was just confusion, but like I was still in that step of trying to direct people, but still just doing it myself.
Mm-hmm. So Adam, I don't know what your experience was as an enlisted soldier, but how does this incident compare to anything that you've seen as a soldier? And did your training? Well, I'm sure I know the answer to this, but did your training as a soldier prepare you for your own injury? And if so, how?
Oh, it definitely helped do that. So it kind of goes back to, I mean, the NCO Corps was probably like one of the most beneficial things I've ever been through in my life because I mean, you know it as well. I mean, right before you step out on mission, you're the guy that's getting everybody around and you're doing PCCs and PCIs, your pre-combat checks, your pre-combat inspections. And so when I had all of the first aid equipment on ground, I had everybody around. And I was like, hey, I was like, this is what these kits are. Because I had a small one that I was keeping on my back. And then I had a medium one that I wore on my plate carrier on my front. But then the backpack one, that was in the bed of my truck. And so I was just telling everybody all week, if anything happens, bed of my truck, take my whole truck or get the bag and just take the bag to whoever needs it. And then I'll be there. And then, we'll figure it out from there. Or if it's me, I have one on my front and I have one on my back. And then kind of showed him it was like the new rat tourniquet instead of the cat tourniquet. So kind of went through that. The night before, I laid everything out, and that's how I remembered that center pocket, orange packets, that's the burn mod, because the night before, I went through the kit because I'm no good as the quote unquote instructor if I don't know what's in the bag. I'm not just going to tell people that have never touched first aid before, like, yeah, here's a bag that can cover everything. Good luck. Because those are just tools. They have to be implemented properly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so yeah, just kind of, and it wasn't like I was, walking around like a drill sergeant, like, Bryce, where's the burn mod pack? It was just general knowledge, and they all seemed to receive it very well. Everybody knew exactly what to grab, what to do. Um, and then as far as that incident compared to what I've seen as an enlisted soldier, So I was in psychological operations, which the command that we fall under on the active duty side of the house is like more like the special operations guys. They go through selection. But since we fall under the same command, that meant we got the same money. And so we had money to do the TCCC and have the full-fledged actors and actually bring out combat medics.
Do all the movies.
I went to JRTC, I went to JMRIC in Germany, you know, overseas. I got to train with the MARSOC medic and do all of that stuff. So just because of the command that I was in, I mean, like I'm not trying to say like I was special forces or anything like that. Yeah. I was just around, I was close enough integrated with it that I got access to what they do. And it was everything they did. I was like, man, I have got to get in on that. And that's what I tried to do when I got out. I tried to go out for special forces. I wanted to be an 18 Delta and second day washout. And I was like, all right, I'm getting out. I'm too old for this.
Yeah, no doubt, man. So this is a question for both of you. And before I ask the question, again, this is not me saying, oh, like anything you do is wrong, because actually you talk about this in your video. But I'm just curious, when you look at this situation, both of you gentlemen. So number one, what are your thoughts about safety when it comes to ballistics and explosives? And I know that you talk about this a little bit in that video. And I've also seen evidence of this in your other videos. And second question is, will this incident change your safety protocols for the channel, Ballistic High Speed?
I don't think it'll really change the protocols a whole lot, other than I know, Bryce, you've now said you'd kind of like to get in on some type of maybe like a first aid class or something and kind of get more of that.
Yeah, I was incredibly humbled by how I could have been more useful in the moment. So
yeah, I like how you word that, man.
But yeah, I mean, I would like to go back through them. I mean, I'm far from, you know, an expert, but
it's so easy to imagine yourself in a scenario and be like, yeah, I would do this, this, and this, and then you're in it, and it's been 3 minutes, and you've barely done anything, and so. Yeah,
and that was nice weather. That wasn't, you know, 30 degrees in the rain. We haven't even got to that part yet.
Yes. It's funny, you know, like as I was saying to you earlier, so I teach a course called AmTrap for med specs, and it's about trauma. But even still, and you'll understand this, Adam, because I'm in the military, like I got to make sure all my boxes are checked. And so even though I teach trauma for the military, somebody noticed that my certification for ATLS was out of date. So I recently in November had to go back and do and it had been more than 4 years. So I couldn't just do a recert. I had to do the full ATLS course again. And I'm like, I was so mad. I was so bitter about this whole thing, because it's like, I fucking teach trauma for you people. I got to take this course. And I was bitter the whole time that I went through this course. But on the last day, I was like, you know, it was good. Like because I do that course, I'm usually the examiner, right? And I'm putting people through the moulage, and I'm saying to the tech over there on the simulator, yo, man, drop the blood pressure. Yo, make him more tachycardic. Yo, like I'm trying to sync people. Like that's part of that's my role. So when I was on the other side, I was like, I'm not sure I'm liking this that much, you know? But after I went through it, you know, I was like, on the last day, I was like, you know what? It's good that I went through this again, because it's just more repetition and more practice doing that thing to make it second nature, so that when I'm out, like if I'm deployed somewhere and now this happens, I've just had another rep under my belt, which is just makes it more second nature, you know?
I think another thing that's good for stuff like that is it kind of resets your train of thought in realizing where people actually are in their mindset of their comfortability in our training when they come to you. Because when I came back from deployment, most of my unit had been rotated out and everything. And so it's a bunch of new guys that haven't been deployed. And so when we're in this training, I'm sitting there, I'm like, how the fuck do you not know this? Like, if you wouldn't have known that just 3 months ago when we were in Somalia, I would have been dead.
Yeah.
But it's like, okay, they haven't done that yet. So they haven't ramped up to that. And that's why you, as the NCO, are supposed to be getting them to that. And so I've had to redo like some courses, you know, going back through CLS and TCCC and stuff. It's like, I already did all this. Yeah, but I was the one telling people, this is what you have. Hey, scream more. Try to run away. Hey, I know Laird can take it. You know, grab him and shake him while he's trying to, you know, get a hold of you or something. And when you're going back through it, suddenly you're the one getting grabbed and shaken. Like, hey, man, quit it. It's
can't you see I'm trying to save somebody? Yeah. No, I like that. Okay, so let's step back for a second, a little bit bigger picture now. Okay, so gentlemen, both of you, what are your general thoughts about this incident? And more specifically, how do you think that this incident compares to other well-known injuries? And the one I'll grab is Scott from Kentucky Ballistics when his BMG exploded. So, you know, what are your general thoughts? And then how do you think this compares to something like that?
Well, I want to say something really quick about the safety part of it. Like Adam said, I don't think this is going to really change a whole lot about what Adam and I sort of talk about and ideate when it comes to safety. There's a whole lot of things that go on behind the scenes that people don't see that are safety related. And sometimes they do see it. And there have been times, and the example I like to use a lot is when we were doing bullet ricochets, where we had solenoids wired up to the trigger of a gun. And despite the fact that you could unplug the electronics and, you know, not have anybody on that trigger, there's still another layer of unexpectedness. And so he had on a full riot shield in front of him to load up this thing to then retreat back to safety to pull the trigger and everything. And there were quite a few people making fun of him for the extra step of safety. And that's been our paradigm for a very long time. And it's always increased and developed more and more as the channel's gone on. And so people will see the accident video and just think it was us messing around with RPGs, but they don't see everything that went on behind the scenes to try to be as prepared and safe as possible. There's 3 other RPG episodes that are in the middle of coming out that were filmed beforehand, and we weren't even shooting the RPGs off our shoulders. They were rigged up to something with a pull string. He was in an excavator bucket, and I was behind a huge mound of dirt, you know, way far away, hiding behind it. And that was our initial approach, was like, how do we be as safe as possible, accurate, you know, and still get good footage? And that's always been our default. And then at the end of the day, it's like, do you want to fire an RPG? It's like, okay, yeah, I'll fire it once or twice, because who would say no to that? And then of course that's when, you know, something goes wrong. So I don't think it's going to change much for the channel. It just sort of reinforces why we do what we do in the way that we do it. So maybe we'll show a little bit more of that on camera. I'm just hoping that the people that do make fun of some of those things now see why we do it, and maybe won't think that way anymore, and maybe develop a little bit more safety in their lives, apparently.
Well, knowing, you know, I notice and see a lot of the safety stuff that you guys implement. And the reason why I asked that question was because of what you have said during the video, where people have made fun of Adam in the past because he's being safety. And my whole point for asking that question was basically to make a statement that you can be super prepared, and still sometimes random shit will happen. Yep. And if you're just fucking around and it's like 2 guys here, hold my beer, watch this, right. Like that's when really bad shit is going to happen. Yep. Right. And this is just an example of, you know, you take all the precautions and still something untoward happened. Right. Like, and if you hadn't taken all the safety precautions, like, and I make this comment in my commentary video. Like, I see so much stuff, you guys are content creators, so like me, you're on the internet checking shit out all the time, and I see so much stuff now that comes through my feed where like I just think, oh my God, like the craziness of what these people are doing, and they have, like, they don't know what they don't know, right?
Yeah.
And it's just, and
But they will know eventually.
well, no, for sure. But like that's the one thing, I'm in Canada, you guys in the United States, we have different laws about firearms. And I'm a little bit bitter because the liberals right now are trying to take away all of our firearms. So that's making me a little bit sad.
Yeah.
But the one thing that's good about that is that not everybody can just go and get a firearm. And that when I see the kinds of things that people do on the internet, and a lot of these people are American. I think to myself, oh my God, man, I wish there were more regulations just so that people couldn't do stupid shit like that.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
it kind of ruins the overall image of proper firearm safety implementations. But like another quick thing with what Bryce was just talking about, I mean, if you had asked somebody in the context outside of this video, hey, do you want to shoot an RPG-7? I honestly don't know of many people that would shoot a gun that would say no to shooting an RPG-7. So that thing cooking off and blowing up on me is a one in incalculable, happenstance.
Yeah, there's a reason it's so shocking when it does happen. There's a reason for that.
So then, like, to the safety thing, when we were firing it, we didn't load any high explosives in the warhead because we were studying the backblast. So there's no reason for it to blow up, up front. So say we had just ditched all of the other safety stuff, and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to shoot the dummy. It'll look better on camera instead of being tied to a water thing. If you watch the torso video when it didn't have anything on it, the first one, the torso's too soft and it just bounces off. So now here's Adam standing, 25, 30 yards away from a UXO. And so who knows? I mean, it's a UXO for a reason. And so now Adam is in the wide open, 30 feet away from, I don't remember how much high explosive is in it, that could just randomly cook off at any second. So now I've got to sprint back and do all this stuff. Or you strap it to a water thing, you peek out, oh, it didn't go, and then none of it's on the camera, but as soon as we're like, oh, that one didn't go, the guy that's in charge of all the explosives is yelling, UXO, UXO, stay in place, and then he himself, after his timetable and everything, goes out, detonates it in place, and then he alerts everybody, scene safe, scene safe, scene safe, and then everybody iterates it. So like when he's like range hot, range hot, range hot, everybody just pairs it, range hot, like, so everybody's just yelling it. And then when everybody goes quiet, that's when the video comes back in. So that's the stuff that, like, it would just be annoying if it was in the video.
Yeah, well,
but it has to happen.
And there's like, that's kind of stuff that in some situations I would like to have in the edit. There's been so many times where just Adam firing a gun at a target and then he'll clear the weapon and say weapon clear, that him doing that alone has annoyed some of our audience, because they're just like, you guys are being pretentious, we don't need to hear that the gun is clear. And it's like, I'm pretty sure my life walking up to those cameras is more important than you not wanting to hear a sentence. You know what I mean? It's like that just reaffirms how much goes on behind the scenes that most people will never see, that is very focused on communicating and safety and all of that stuff. And we miss out on a lot of like what other channels do, where they just kind of go to a range, blow stuff up, shoot stuff, do whatever they want, because ours are run like film sets and with range safety, and it's very slow and methodical, but it's a little bit less fun, but it's a lot more safe.
Well, it's interesting, like I think about every time we go to the range. As medical professionals in the military, we're purple trade, right? Like, we're not necessarily, like, I'm Army, but I could be Army and still on a Navy ship, or I could be in the Air Force. So we're purple trade. We go wherever. So when we do our annual recertifications, they're just trying to make sure that we don't kill each other, or so they always make us recert together. So it's all the med people together. And I think about how we do range, how we do our range recertification, and I spend some time on the range because I'm outside of the military. I'm certified, so I have my own AR-15. I have my own handgun, SIG P320, and I go to the range and practice, because if I'm going to shoot, if I ever have to shoot something, I want to make sure I can hit it. So I do that, but not all of us do that, and some of them only pick up the firearm once a year when we do the recertification. And the range is very much the way that you run your videos, but it's that way for a reason, right? Because like there have been numerous times when I'm on the range and I have somebody beside me who's not very familiar with firearms. They underestimate how easy it is to laze somebody with because a pistol is only this long, right? And like it's easy to light somebody up, and they don't realize. And you watch people do shit and you're like, holy crap. And to think, again, I don't want to, I can't comment. I'm not American, so I can't comment on the Second Amendment. But knowing how easy it is for people to do stupid shit if they have no formal training, then it makes you understand why things need to be the way they are when you go to the range. Because it's easy to get lit up, man. It's easy for things to happen. And I've been on courses and had I've seen lots of accidental discharge, negligent discharges, man. Like I've seen several. So
yeah, it's one of those things. It's, I don't know. It's like often equated. It's like, I would never do that.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it does happen, and sure, 99% of the time it goes off into the dirt, and yeah, you just look like an idiot. But it's that 1%. Someone's dead now.
Yes.
And now there's funerals. Mom's got to bury her kid, all because you wouldn't take something serious for the 2 hours that you are involved in this activity.
Yep.
And
or you wanted to look cool on Instagram or get a cool Snapchat video or whatever.
And it's I don't know how common this is for other people, but like there's a lot of times I've been to ranges and just the existence of the person in the range next to you makes you constantly have this like background noise of discomfort, because you can tell already they're not very well versed in their firearm, and whether it's they're constantly fumbling or just not handling things well, and now you're constantly a little uncomfortable the entire time you're there because you're worried about, or is he going to do something dumb 10 seconds from now. And it's a part of the gun industry, unfortunately, but it's something I wish people would pay more attention to.
I wouldn't ever, personally, just as a kind of like a constitutionalist purist for the most part, I would never push for like a mandatory training course or permutation or anything like that. I just wish that we could get society in the mindset of realizing how serious firearms are and how important it is to, if you're going to go buy one, go get some training with it. So I'm an FFL myself, and so I have people come in all the time to pick up their firearms. And you can immediately tell which one is picking up his 50th versus his first. And so I've had many people that I can just kind of tell that they don't really know what they're doing. And so I just tell them like, hey, this weekend, come back and I will give you a course on how to use this. And they're like, oh, how much does that cost? I do not charge for it. It's absolutely free. You bring the ammo. I will teach you how to be safe with this. I'm not going to run you through how to clear a house. But I'm going to teach you how to, not accidentally shoot yourself in the foot while you're cleaning it and stuff like that. And I just wish more people would they're out there. Any gun shop, I have a feeling, would tell you exactly how to do this. If not, I don't know. Call me and I'm going to call them and ream their ass, because as a federal firearms licensee holder, that's what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah. Again, I'm a Canadian, so I can't really comment on the Second Amendment and people have people take me seriously. But when I look to our situation in Canada, I think to myself, as a gun owner, like I see a lot of content from the United States and people, oh, the Second Amendment, we should be able to do whatever the fuck we want, blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. And I think to myself, I think that's the wrong approach. Because for people who have no education or understanding of guns, all they hear are politicians who want to take them away, and then they see associated with it this picture or a video of some guy going, over my dead body, you're going to take. And I think that's the wrong approach. And what it should be is the gun community, as we as gun owners, should be saying, you know what? This behavior that people are doing over here is bad news. Like, we don't support that, and these people should be properly trained, and we espouse a position that says that people who own guns should store them responsibly, use them responsibly, and they should be properly trained. And we should be saying that. At least that's what I feel in Canada, because when the public who are not gun owners hear what the politicians say, and then they see people going over my dead body, then they go, well, you look like psychos, and the politicians say you're psychos, so
right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
I just wish it was a little more natural. I mean, everything is, all back in my day, but I mean, back in my dad's day, they took firearm safety courses in school.
yes.
Everybody just knew how to do it. Because, I mean, to me, if you're going to have the most heavily armed population on the planet, to me, it made no sense to remove the education of how these things work from the general public. I never understood that. I mean, it'll never come back. I mean, there's no way that they're going to revert to that. But yeah, it's and growing up with guns, it's crazy to me that some people don't know how they work. I mean, that's just like I guess a point of privilege of just understanding my entire life. To see people like, you've never shot a gun before? Really? It's crazy.
Yep. So Adam, how long before you're back to normal?
Oh, I don't know. They said like I might not even be able to swim for like a year. I don't know if that was just like an initial assessment or skin grafts. That's just like a through and through. And then as far as scarring and things, I mean, that's just time until it heals. But I mean, I'm pretty well fully mobile. I can tell that my body still must be doing a bunch. If I like getting back into the gym, like after the gym, I pretty much have to take a nap. I mean, my body is still doing a lot right now. If I get out to work out in my shop, luckily I'm self-employed, so like I can go work for a few hours, and if I start to get groggy, I can just come in and kind of lay down and take it easy for a little bit. But on the whole, I mean, I'm up back to 80% normal, aside from the whole cheekbone thing, but we're getting that one figured out.
Yeah. I don't believe in playing the lottery. I think that's a tax on people, but have you played the lottery yet, man?
No, I keep telling people I'm pretty sure I used all my luck.
Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
it's either the luck that he survived so well, or it's the unluckiness that it happened to him at all. It's like, which way do you
Right,
think
yeah.
about it?
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. So one of the things when I get informed consent from people about procedures, I have to talk to them about the risk of complications. And I tell people, oh, generally the risk of complication from this procedure may be less than 1%. But the thing is, if it happens to you, it's not less than 1%, it's 100%, right? So it's all on how you look at the numbers, right? It could be extraordinarily rare, but if it happened to you, well, shit, it was 100% because it happened,
Bryce, you see what's going on behind you?
I know, I'm watching that ever so.
All right.
So I don't want to keep you guys much longer. We've already been on for a long time. But what's two last questions? What's in store for Ballistic High Speed 2024?
Well, right now we're waiting for this number to tick over to 500,000. That's what we're waiting on. 2024, get the rest of our RPG episodes out. The way that 2023 ended was was very, I guess blessed would be a right way to word it, because we got to meet a lot of really cool people like Brandon Herrera, a bunch of his team, a bunch of other really big gun tubers. We've talked to Scott from Kentucky Ballistics personally. We met him down in Texas at a creator event, and it sort of propelled us into 2024, knowing a lot of new people, a lot of cool people to be on our side that we can talk to and potentially make content with. So I think it was,
Hey!
yeah. So I think things are going to in a oh yeah, there it was, sorry. So I think that 2024 is going to be probably a lot of collaborations, a lot of bigger projects. We've got a project we're trying to film and get done soon. It's just now we're in the middle of winter, of course, that we've been working on for several months, if not almost a year at this point. So a lot of bigger projects. Yeah, I think we're gonna try to get to 1 million subscribers by the end of the year, and just see what happens. I'm sure Adam can speak for himself, but like at this point, I'm just happy that we're both still here. We're both ready to make more content. We're both still just as inspired and interested in doing our channel. So I think it'll just be keep doing what we're doing and just make it bigger and better each time, and still focus on safety.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. Well, first, let me be the first one to officially congratulate you on making 500,000 subscribers.
Thank you. Thank you.
We don't get a new plaque for 500,000, so we'll have to wait for more.
Yeah. And last question. So where can people find you?
Primarily on YouTube. We've got Instagram and like Facebook and stuff as well. But most of our important stuff is on YouTube, Ballistic High Speed, right here on YouTube. We've got a Patreon if people like to support. They can see our content, early. We give out free merch and stuff on there, all sorts of cool stuff. Yeah, primarily on YouTube.
Perfect. Well, once again, I wanted to say thank you guys for coming on and discussing this experience with me. I really like what you guys do, and I do. I've used some of your footage, which you guys have graciously provided in the past. But in moving forward into the future, I do have some ideas, and at some point, I would love to be able to do a more closer collab and potentially even come visit you guys and do something, because I think that there are some interesting questions that I want to ask that only somebody like you guys can answer. So thank you very much for spending the time with me today.
Absolutely.
Of course, yeah. Thank you so much.
I've watched your content for a long time, and I'm even outside of it being me, I'm pretty excited to see what the breakdown is on this one. So I'll be looking for it.
It's going to be a long one, I warn you. But there'll be lots of stuff in there. But thanks again, guys. And we will definitely connect again in the future.